Can I have everybody's attention? So good afternoon. How was lunch? Can we get an applause? Everything was delicious, so I hope you had enough food. There was plenty. So our next on our agenda, 1:30 to 2 p.m. is a legislative update. So you are going to hear from Mary Clark and Jackie Beaudry, and they're going to provide you a legislative update. They're going to sit at the table here. They have mics. We did move the podium back so that those of you on the far left over here can kind of have a sight line to them. But I will turn it over to Jackie. Okay, is that better? Yes. Good. Hi, I'm Jackie Beaudry. I'm the city clerk in Ann Arbor, and I'm recently elected as the second vice president for MAMC. So you all know Mary. She and I are going to go through the work of the legislative committee, and typically that also includes Adam Witt, who's our first vice president, and he had to leave early today. Adam chairs or co-chairs the CEO with the county clerks, and then the legislative committee is strictly made up of our members. So many of you in the room are on that committee. What we're going to do is go through the MAMC's legislative priorities, and then many of our current priorities are in some form of introduced legislation, or maybe even being taken up today, a few of these priorities. So I will let you know what MAMC has as a priority, as well as the positions that we've taken, and then Mary will chime in on where we are at testifying and where some of these bills are at in the legislature. Because things, as some of you may be aware, are moving really quickly this year. There's a lot of activity on the elections front in the legislature. So the approved priorities for 2021 and 2022, at the discretion of the clerk to allow for early voting so voters can place their ballot through a tabulator. And I just want to clarify on this one that there is, early voting doesn't necessarily have, there's different opinions between big cities and small cities and township and cities. So at the legislative committee of MAMC, we added the at the discretion of the clerk. So we as a board and as an organization are lobbying for clerks to have the discretion to allow for early voting, and being different than no reason absentee, but actual tabulation of ballots. And there is in the Senate package, Senate Bill 300, and the Michigan clerks, we voted in opposition of that bill because we don't feel that it's enough or benefits our interests. That particular piece of legislation only allowed for 1 day of early voting, 2 Saturdays prior to the election, and we felt like that not only was not enough, but would also be confusing to voters. You may have heard your neighbor voted last Saturday, and now it's not an option for you.
And it required you to open, they would vote in their precinct, so you would have opened all your precincts for 1 day, 2 Saturdays before. So that was joyous to explain to them what a really bad idea that was.
So that just shows you that some of our priorities, bills may be introduced that seem to match our priorities, but depending on the specific language, we may or may not support. So while we do support early voting, we unanimously opposed the current proposal in the Senate. Another priority is the early processing of absentee ballots. You'll remember that we were allowed with a one-time change in law for November 2020 only, and so we continue to support early processing of absentee ballots. That would include putting ballots through a tabulator, and there is one bill currently, Senate Bill 283. Information on that, Mary? This would allow again, the early processing, I do have a note here. We support it in concept, but there is mixed opinions among our members that currently any introduced bills on early processing have a population restriction. And so some of our smaller members have asked that we continue to support that any clerks can do early processing. I believe the current proposal is you have to have over 25,000.
Right, they chose not to change what they granted us as a one-time in November of 2020, and I, in many occasions, explained to them that everything in our world is proportional, and so a huge increase, a 50% increase in AV ballots for someone who is small and has 1.5 positions, including themselves, is just as challenging to work on as me with 33,000 residents, or Ann Arbor with 150 or however many they have. The idea, trying to get them to understand that all of this is proportional and that they have to take into consideration the wide array of precinct jurisdictional sizes we have, I should say, not precinct sizes, jurisdictional sizes. But I haven't got them to budge off that yet. I haven't given up.
So our next priority is to establish election dates in June and November of each year, with the exception of presidential years where we would still have the presidential primary in March. So we would have March, June, and November, eliminating August. And there is several packages in the Senate right now. Did you have other comments on that one? Senate Bill 130 is one of, there are several bills related to the June primary.
And when I was testifying in the Senate and something came up, and I had well, it kind of spilled out, but Senator McBroom zeroed right in on what I said, because there really aren't audits after the August election because there's no time, and to try to explain, I mean, it's not that nothing happens, but a risk limiting audit connected to the August election would be challenging because you're so quickly into work in September, because we all know that by Labor Day, we're rolling in the November election already. And so he was quite intrigued that if he moved to June, he could have audits with that election. And I'm like, whatever makes you happy that gets the damn date moved, I'm gonna nod for, okay?
We have a question?
How would that,
Can you go to
how would that impact those in May who have May elections? Are you doing away with the May election?
Well, much to the chagrin of the school boards who came and testified against how the world will stop spinning, the sun will now come up in the west. If this happens, we are lobbying for June. And we don't care. If you want to do May and May and November, fine, or June and November. But somebody had the idea to propose that we do it the third Tuesday in June. And our response was, please don't introduce something different to the regime. The first Tuesday after the first Monday is kind of cast in concrete, and we'd like to leave it that way. So don't go stirring the pot. So it made sense once they thought about it. They seem to have someone walk them through every word and the impact of every word. So I think their intentions are good, but they have no clue about what the impact of what they're doing is. So when we can get them to understand the impact, lots of times they care.
Yeah, so that would be just the 2 dates, except for in the fourth year, the March primary. So these next two I'll go over together, and then Mary can elaborate. These are being taken up today, actually. So one of our priorities is to expand precinct locations, and this would, what we have lobbied for is for locations to be permitted for using precincts, given some of the concerns of the schools over safety, and as well as some churches no longer being available. So what we are looking is for nonprofits and other community or recognized public buildings to be allowed for precincts. And do you want me to do both? And then the other one is, we have long advocated, especially with no reason absentee voting, to expand precinct size to limit to 4,000 active registered voters. This would increase the current limit of 2,999 to no more than 4,000 active voters in a precinct. And of course, this isn't a mandate. This is if you are a community that knows you're now looking at 50% or more absentee, it may make sense to have your individual precinct locations to allow for a larger registered voter, as so many people are switching to early absentee voting. So that's our thought there, and both of these are current movement is happening on these ideas.
They passed the House, both of them. It's House Bill 4134 is the precinct size, and we asked them to stop the 999 stuff and just could we do something like 4,000? We asked for 5 in negotiations. We got 4, so and it is very much. I assured them no clerk is going to commit political suicide. I mean, we're not looking for some way to implode our offices. We're not going to make a decision to consolidate and raise those numbers when we're going to increase lines. It has to be done judiciously based on your particular jurisdiction, so that some may or may not change. You may not have a reason to change some. I have 16 precincts. I've already done some of my redistricting lines, and I could go to 15 precincts, for example, if I could take a landlocked precinct that has a 58% permanent AV list. There's no future growth in that area possible, so I tried to use the example of why that would be something that I would do, but it's not mandated, and a clerk doesn't have to do it. And then the precinct location, I have long argued that we need more choices, because MAMC's position has been we do not support legislation that mandates schools allow us there. We don't want to become our local community's enemy. And so it's not going to come out of our mouths that ever would happen. And there are other 501 classifications. I, for example, have 3 credit unions, which are 501, I think 6s or something. But they're not an acceptable precinct site because of possible conflict of interest, because they might have legislation. And my response is, people walk in schools to do voting every election. Well, not in my community, because I don't have any schools in mine that allow precincts. But you're voting on a school millage in the school building. If that's not a conflict of interest, then I'm not buying that you think a credit union is a conflict of interest. So we're still negotiating that. We're not happy with what they did, but in this world, sometimes you take the baby step, you take the crack in the door, you got it open, and then you hope that the next round you have someone that's a little more open to what you're trying to really accomplish and will shove the door open more. You had a question?
Yes, in the legislation that increases the size of the precincts, they left the size of a consolidated precinct at 5,000. Has there been any input from the MAMC on increasing that number, so that if we did increase the size of our precincts, we could still consolidate? Because otherwise it really takes away that option.
You can only consolidate in a non-state and federal.
Right. So for instance, in this election coming up, I'm consolidating 2 of my precincts. However, if I increase the size of those precincts to 4,000 when we redistrict, I will no longer be able to consolidate those precincts for that election. Because they'll be over the 5,000 limit.
Gotcha. We haven't done that, but I will,
I'll make a note of that.
yeah, we'll take that up. Thank you.
And
Good catch.
Yeah, and I assume you do know that you can subtract the inactive voter file in reaching that 5,000, but of course, when you're increasing the overall precincts, understood. And then our final, on our top priority list is to eliminate the mandatory requirement to maintain MasterCards. Because the signatures are in the QBF system and are. And since we have the electronic signatures, we don't see a need for all the busy work of filing MasterCards. There is no movement or any bills introduced on this subject, but remains one of our priorities.
And we've asked for this to be an optional regarding MasterCard. I happen to be a MasterCard advocate because I can go back and look at an actual physical signature for most of my voters that have been in my community for a long time. And everybody knows, well, the signature at the Secretary of State's office, you're on a slanty thing like this that you're trying to write. And so when they're sitting at a table and signing, it looks oftentimes more like what's on my MasterCard than what's on QBF. So, and the state is working, and Jonathan can maybe speak to this, but they're updating more frequently, which was also a reason that, one of the problems that we had, because it's not a mandatory download when you sign a new piece at the Secretary of State's office.
Sorry if I said that was the last one. I have a couple more.
She lied.
Yeah, that are on our priority list. To require a disclaimer on third-party applications that they're not being sent by the state or a local jurisdiction. And a lot of you probably had this issue in 2020 with the really out-of-date apps being sent, whether it was voter registration or AV apps to, your people's dogs and somebody who died 30 years ago. And so that's for us that the third parties would have to indicate that this was not coming from state or local officials. And I don't believe there's any movement on that.
There hasn't been any movement on that, but we are still lobbying hard to get that to move before the 2022 election. Because it's going to be just as ugly as it was in 2020. With everybody coming in mad because they've got their 10th application for ballot.
And another priority for us was to require jurisdictions to maintain a permanent absent voter list. And this would allow consistency when someone moves from community to community, that they don't lose that. I was on the permanent AV list in Town A, but now Town B is saying that's not a thing. And this ties back to, it is part of 4134 as part of the increase in precinct size, remember, is tied to the understanding that more people are voting early through absentee ballot, which is why you can increase your in-person precincts. So those are related in that regard, and 4134 does include a requirement for a permanent AV list.
I will say that we have had quite the controversy surrounding Senate Bill, if I look for the number, I should have it tattooed on my arm, 303 and 304 Senate bills. They're part of that original 29 or 39 or 49, whatever they came up with, bill package. And it, 303 deals with requiring a provisional envelope ballot doing away with the affidavit of no ID in the precinct election day. And I've testified in the House and I've testified in the Senate. This is a minuscule amount of our voters, but they are determined that it is a huge source of potential fraud. So it passed the Senate, it went to the House, got a significant rewrite in the House that mandated every voter in the precinct's signature was subject to challenge and had to be verified. Just like they can challenge residency and age and citizenship. We obviously really oppose that, and the originator of the bill, Senator Tom Barrett, eventually opposed the House version. So I don't know where it's going to end up. The longer they stay paralyzed with the House and Senate differences, the longer it is before it could potentially become law. 304 is attached to the burden of proof for a provisional ballot. And you and I both know, we all know, a provisional envelope ballot is rarely cured. And what we are arguing for is a cure election day versus a provisional envelope ballot. And we proposed a number of options on how to cure. They could write their driver's license number if they don't have an ID. They could do the last 4 digits of their SOCH. That we, Jonathan, don't kill me on this one, we could have their picture from their state ID or driver's license downloaded with QVF. But we want a cure in the precinct versus a provisional envelope ballot. So don't tell them it's not possible, if it's not possible, Jonathan, until we can work through other possibilities. Because I just bat my eyes and say, well, what about? Then another,
Do you have more? I have one more priority. Our last priority is to remove any challenge based on residency when registering in person with the clerk's office with appropriate documentation in the last 14 days. And this one's personal to me as a college town, but anybody registering, there's no magic between day 15, day 20, and day 10. And so to challenge somebody standing in person in your office because they're using something other than a driver's license with their address on it is ridiculous. If they have a driver's license with their address on it, they're probably not registering in the last 14 days. So no surprise, there's no traction on this, but remains a priority for us. And I will just note, we do have a list of other priorities, but we've picked our top ones we want to see some of these changes happen before we've discussed other changes that are on our radar, but we're concentrating on kind of our top list. So we do also have a secondary priority list. So if there's something you're thinking, I thought the legislative committee had taken up, it could be on our back burner, but we haven't forgotten about it. So these are the top priorities, and a lot of them, as we've discussed, are moving. So then we will, when we make these achievements, we will bring other things up. So we continue to add to what the priority is. Just right now, there's a lot of things happening, so we're trying to concentrate on what we've deemed most important.
we're having to react to the package of bills that were introduced in the Senate and the House as a result of some people's displeasure with the outcome of the 2020 election. So in a normal world, we would be advancing and focused on more of our priorities, but we're focused on the priorities that are somehow attached to the bills that are out. But the big issue is that we are in a very reactive mode, which is not my favorite mode to be in. I want to bring your attention to two other really important bills that Jackie and I had, and Melanie had a meeting with House Republican staff and the chair of the House Committee that requires the inspectors to sign a declaration of their party affiliation. And we have argued against this. The response to me has been this is a caucus priority, and that they mark on the application is not sufficient. We've been able to somewhat tamper it down because there was to be a posted, sworn, notarized affidavit posted in the precincts for each worker, and I said, you're killing me here. I mean, we're never going to have people work. And so we're probably going to be sending out in the next couple of weeks, shortly after Labor Day, a list of bills that we're going to ask you to contact your senator and your representative on, to put on their radar screen to support or to oppose, and we'll give you some talking points for them, because we're going to have to rally the troops on some of these. And another one that we're negotiating on also in the House, so 4876 is the party affiliation of workers. And I did explain to the senators, well, but this is the House, I did explain to the representatives present that Michigan is not a party mandatory state, so you don't have to be a member of a party to vote in Michigan. I guess that escaped them, but the other bill is 4897, and that deals with challengers. I was told they want to level the playing field of what happens in a precinct and what happens in the clerk's office on election day. And that means that challengers would have the right to be present in the clerk's office on election day. And we immediately and vehemently oppose that there is a lot of confidential things inside a clerk's office, and a challenger in there is inappropriate. Absolutely inappropriate. So they backed away from that a little bit and landed on in a designated space designated by the clerk, which will be outside my office door in the lobby, because it's not possible. It's just not possible. And it's a concern with smaller jurisdictions that where in the blue blazes am I going to put this person? And so we're still, but that's a hill they're willing to die on. So those two, we just had another meeting on, and I didn't walk away feeling like they made a minor adjustment. Okay, I understand you don't have a lot of space, and it's where you say you can put them. But we didn't land on, what if where you say you put them is on the front lawn because there are no other options? You know, what do you do with a clerk who's issuing ballots out of their house? Because that happens in smaller jurisdictions. So Representative Bolin is these are, they're there on them, man, I tell you. I'm talking till I'm blue in the face. Jackie was there, Melanie was there. We gave them all of these different scenarios, and they're like, okay, but They should have, the playing field has to be leveled.
Thank you, Mary. Melanie's indicating that we're at time. I just had a note that we were going to mention one more bill, that this is not our priority, but we are supporting for obvious reasons, and that's Senate Bill 306, which would require the Secretary of State to prepare a report regarding clerks who are not current with training and to post that report. We did ask, and it was accepted, that there would be a 30-day grace period or opportunity for the Bureau of Elections, Secretary of State to alert clerks who are not compliant. But we certainly, as an organization that promotes the professionalism of clerks and ongoing professional development and training, we're not going to not support a bill that publicizes that we are all current with our training. But we did get that exception in there, so if there's like an oopsie, you'll have an opportunity before there's this public shaming to fix any training deficiencies. So we wanted to make you aware of that.
I know we're up, but real quick.
I just want to thank you guys for all the time that you've taken to testify on our behalf. I've been watching a lot of it, and I know it's taken up a lot of your time, and we really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Bill 130, do you have, it's the June versus the August, do you have when that is on your radar for again?
It will not, it would, should it pass, and there is at least some interest now, it would not go into effect until after the 2022 election.
Oh, that's, okay.
Yeah, I mean, the Bureau, and we all were in agreement on that. Merciful God, let's be serious here. It cannot happen that fast.
So for June, or for 2022, it will still be August?
Yes.
And May for,
Well, right.
as necessary.
Yes.
Okay, I know, but I want to show you two things. If you have not downloaded and read the Oversight Committee report on the November 2020 election, I urge, it's about, I don't know, 20 pages or 40 pages or something. Yeah. But it's good reading. I encourage you very much to download it and read it. And then you can ask the question I did, which was in the front of it, it says Senator McBroom, who's taken quite a hit on his position that there was no fraud in Michigan's elections. Thank you, thank you, thank you. We already knew that, but it's nice to have it affirmed. But then if you go to the back, it's like, who wrote the back of it? Because that's where the Senate bill, all the Senate bill packages of all the things that are wrong are talked about. So, but it is heartening to realize that someone honestly does understand what we did and that we're good. One more quick thing. I know, the Republicans, if you have not seen the press release, there is a Republican group, I don't know what his name is, Rowe or something. Jamie Rowe. They announced they're starting the petition, the citizens petition, and you know that there's, I'm sure it wasn't intended for this, but a loophole, I call it a loophole in the Michigan Constitution, which allows a citizen referendum to be acted on, that the legislature can either accept it and bam, it's law, or they can send it to the ballot. And it is much stricter than, and it's much more back, all the stuff we've negotiated is out the window in this. So I've done a couple interviews about how I feel about it, and the one reporter I've talked to several times, I said, you're kidding me, right? You're asking me how I feel about this? Because it undoes a lot of the stuff that we've worked hard to negotiate to get a middle ground on. So again, tell everybody don't sign it. That there's an ability for 340,047 people, I think it is, to sign and be able to impact 7 million people, and we get no vote, is ridiculous. I know it's in the Constitution, but it's ugly. Thank you.
Thank you. If we can have a big round of applause for Mary and Jackie. They always work very diligently on your behalf legislatively. Next up, we have a redistricting session with the Bureau of Elections. Director Jonathan Brader is here with his team. I will let him introduce his team. We want to get started so that we can kind of stay on track.
So you take past this 40
Depending on what happens. I know we have growth. We have to do something that we have a precinct that's almost at the max.
good thing. 1,000 minimum.
Thank you, Melanie, and thanks to Mamc for having us as always. We always really appreciate the opportunity to meet with you all, and it's so nice to see so many of you in person and be in this wonderful space, although it is giving me some bad flashbacks to music classes and trying to remember which composer wrote which piece, which I got wrong, but it's still cool to be here. So before I get started, so I'm Jonathan Brader. I'm the Director of the Bureau of Elections. With me from the Bureau of Elections is Christy Dugan, Sharon McCleary, and Riley Millard. If you have any questions or want to meet with any of us, now's a good time. I'm going to talk about sort of an overview of the redistricting process for next year, and then Christy's going to talk in a little more detail about what that's going to mean for you and how you interact with us. And then after that, of course, you have a panel of your colleagues who can tell you really in depth what it looks like from the clerk side. Before we get into that, just a couple things, just following from the last panel. Yes, we have updated a whole bunch of signatures in the qualified voter file. We're very happy about that. When we got our new driver database system in, the CAR system, that made it much easier for us to pull signatures in. So we updated about 3 million signatures with newer signatures. So that will help a lot. We're very happy about that. We're also working on an ongoing process that will make sure they get updated going forward. It doesn't necessarily solve the problem of maybe their signature when they get their driver's license not being as careful as what they might do in the registering to vote. But I do think the way the process works now is they are usually signing a piece of paper on a flat desk, so hopefully that will eventually get better. The other thing is in terms of photos in the e-poll book, it's an interesting idea. We haven't really analyzed it that much. I think one thing that we would have to be cognizant of, though, is that that's making the e-poll book file a lot bigger. I know how much everyone enjoys downloading that on Monday night, so we would have to figure out a way to get all that data in the e-poll book. So it's I think, an interesting solution, an interesting compromise, and it's something we have to look at. The final thing I just want to do before I get into redistricting is I really appreciated the chance to see you celebrate your colleagues, both from last year and this year, for Clerks of the Year. As I said to Clerk Roebuck, who won the County Clerk of the Year, it was either the best or the worst time to win Clerk of the Year. I'm not sure which. But we really appreciate the work you're all doing, and I know, because we hear from you every day, that you're still getting a lot of unfair comments and criticism and abuse about the way the last election was conducted, even if you weren't the clerk for that election. I just want to point everyone to two things. One, we did release a memorandum earlier in August. It's in the e-learning center that really outlines all the things that you can and cannot do in terms of getting people access to election equipment and records. It's not really any new information, but it just summarizes like why people can't come in and do a forensic image of your voting tabulator. And the way to handle it if people do want to look at things like ballots or tabular tapes, which they do have the right to do. So just that's a reference. It's in the e-learning center. It was circulated in the news update. The other thing I wanted to mention to people is we have heard from the FBI and the Department of Justice that they are prioritizing threats against election officials as an area of enforcement. So if you're getting threats, of course, if it's an emergency, you should always contact local law enforcement first. But the DOJ is asking that you report those to the federal authorities as well, so they can make that part of their nationwide focus on protecting election officials throughout the country. We're going to be posting soon, if we haven't already, the updated list of the election crime coordinator for the state of Michigan at the federal level. So we'll have more information about that, but I just wanted to let you know because that's a fairly recent development. So with that, I'm very happy to actually talk about the future instead of continuing to talk about 2020. A couple of basics just about redistricting and why we do it. Both the Michigan Constitution and our state laws do require the redrawing of a bunch of our districts after each decennial census. It also requires, of course, counties to redraw their county commission line, as well as similar requirements in a lot of municipal charters that require those lines to be withdrawn as well. The reason we do this is basically because, populations, people move around, as we saw with the new census data that's been coming out. Districts change sizes, people move, so we want to keep a basic, rough idea of equal population and fair representation across our districts. That's basically why we're doing this. What's different this year is the Michigan Independent Citizens Redistricting Commission. I know you're all very familiar with Proposal 2018-3. It changed your lives quite a bit. But 2018-2, you're also probably familiar with 2018-1 because of all the marijuana billboards you see on the highway, as well as the various charter amendments and other issues that you've gotten with that. So all three of those proposals affected your lives. Proposal 2018-2 was the one that dealt with the Independent Citizens Redistricting Commission. We actually did used to have a redistricting commission in the Michigan Constitution many decades ago. It kind of became defunct. But this replaced the old process where it was done by the legislature with a citizens commission. It is made up of, first of all, it's autonomous. They don't report to us or to anybody else. They're an independent commission. They have 13 people who were voters who were randomly selected. There were about 10,000 people who applied statewide, which is pretty good. More than we've seen in other states that had similar setups. So we're happy to see the level of participation there. But once those 10,000 applied, there was basically a random selection process. There were some caveats to that. It had to be 4 Democrats, 4 Republicans, and 5 people who didn't affiliate with either of those two parties. And then also the majority and minority leaders of each chamber in the state legislature got to strike some people, kind of like jury strikes, if they thought that they wouldn't be fair or otherwise appropriate members of the commission. So, but with that said, it was otherwise completely random. And so there are a few things that sort of govern their work. They have to have, to actually pass the maps ultimately, they need a vote of 9 out of 13, so it's a supermajority requirement. They also have to pass those maps with at least one of the Democrats, one of the Republicans, and at least one, I think, of the non-affiliated people, maybe 2, I think it's 1. But in any case, there needs to be a significant and bipartisan and also nonpartisan or not major partisan agreement with the maps that they draw. So there's a lot of protections in place to ensure that there's a fair amount of consensus around what they end up doing. So the commission doesn't draw everything. They don't draw every single district in the state, but they do draw the United States Congress districts and the State House and the State Senate districts. They have to have at least 10 public hearings, although they're having a lot more than that. And they have to provide 45 days of public comment before they put their maps in place, which is relevant to the timing, as I'll describe in a bit. But I do want to note that they're actually meeting today. I think they're also meeting tomorrow and Friday. They're having a whole bunch of public meetings. The meeting schedule is available at michigan.gov/MICRC. So if any of your voters, constituents, or if you are interested in participating in any of their meetings, providing testimony, feedback on maps, or otherwise, their schedule is posted online, and all their meetings, I believe all their meetings are live streamed, but now that they're back to in-person meetings, I don't know whether or not you can participate remotely. We do have a role in this, or the Secretary of State does have a role in this. Although they are independent commission, we kind of serve as the secretary of the MICRC, or really the Secretary of State does, not specifically the Bureau. But we were administering the application process, and that's why we were pleased with the number of people in it applying. The application and selection, which was done basically like with a random drawing, but we had to hire a contractor to do that. And then we serve as the secretary without a vote of the commission, so basically take minutes and otherwise, although they have moved a lot of that to some of the staff that they've hired. So what do they have to do to draw these districts? Well, they have a lot of different things they have to keep in mind. The goal behind the proposal was basically to take partisan gerrymandering out of the process, or to take kind of the incumbent advantage that was sometimes prioritized when legislators drew these districts, and replace it with some standards that have to be followed by an independent body. So the criteria that they have to follow, you can actually get more detail on this if you read the constitutional amendment, which is quite lengthy. But there has to be equal population. They have to comply with the Voting Rights Act and other federal laws. They have to be geographically contiguous. They have to consider communities of interest. They have to consider partisan fairness. They are supposed to disregard political incumbents. They're supposed to respect local government boundaries, and they're supposed to consider compactness. So that's obviously a lot of things to consider at once. It's not a unique thing to the MICRC or this process, but it is often difficult to reconcile all these different considerations when coming up with a set of districts. And of course, you can't completely accomplish all of these goals perfectly at the same time, so it's the commission's job to try to balance these things and come up with maps that are fair. I will note that there's quite a few, there's quite a bit of federal requirements here, both with the Voting Rights Act, the Civil Rights Act, some things in the Constitution that place a lot of additional limitations and protections around the drawing of districts. So it's not just in our state law, but they also have to be aware of some of the federal requirements as well. So there's a lot to balance there. That's one challenge they have. The other challenge they have is that this whole thing was set up with the idea that we were going to get our census data for redistricting in April. That did not happen. There's two main kinds of census data that are used for election purposes. One is the apportionment data. So that's not the county commission apportionment, but congressional apportionment. So that's what determines how many congressional seats and how many votes the electoral college each state has. So that was released earlier in the year, and that's where unfortunately we lost a congressional seat. But the more detailed data, which has information at the census block level and much more detailed population analysis and demographic analysis, is the redistricting data. And that is normally, in a normal decennial, post-decennial year, that is normally released in April. But this year, because of delays associated with COVID-19, we ended up getting it a lot later. The date that the Census Bureau gave us to give us the official final census redistricting data was September 30th. So that's about 5-6 months later than we would have gotten it. They did release about a couple weeks ago a version of the data which is in the legacy format. So it has information you can use for redistricting, but the data is kind of raw and not as easy to use. But that data is available, and the Redistricting Commission has been starting to work with it. But nonetheless, they were expecting to have this back in April. The problem with that is that the Constitution requires that they're supposed to have their maps drawn by September 17th. They're then supposed to allow 45 days of public comment, and then adopt the maps by November 1st. So that's not likely going to be possible, or almost certainly will not be possible, because of the census data coming in late. So they're working actively on this now, but there's not going to be enough time, according to the Commission, to get all that done in a matter of weeks when they're expected to have several months to work on it. So what will that mean? I think the Commission had asked the Supreme Court, the Michigan Supreme Court, for more time because of the census delay. The Michigan Supreme Court didn't act on that. They basically, they just decided not basically to grant proactively an extension of the deadline. But there may be some, when these maps eventually come in, which will be later than November 1st, there may be some additional action in the courts or otherwise. But I think they're hoping to get the maps done by the end of the year, which will be a challenge for us, but I think is about as good as they can do with the amount of time they have. So what does that mean for us? So it means we don't know exactly when the maps are going to be final. This isn't even counting the possibility of lawsuits or other things that could slow down the process, which we see all the time. But what we ultimately have to do, we and you, is we have to take these new maps and we have to turn them into ballots to make sure that every voter across the state gets the right ballot with all the different district layers that they have. There's 19, I think, different types of districts in Michigan. Only 3 of those are drawn by the Commission, but a lot of the other ones are changing as well. So after they complete their work, that's where we begin our work to get these in the maps and to update the QBF. So here's kind of just what we have to do to make this happen. As I said, we don't know when for sure the MICRC is going to have their final maps. But we all need to work back from 2022 to actually get these maps implemented and also get all the voters in the right place to get them the right ballots for that election. So you're all familiar with the general approach here, but obviously, although the general elections in November 2022, a lot of things happened before that. We really need to hit the August primary election, not the general. People need to start getting their absentee ballots in June. Ballots need to be printed at the beginning of June. Everyone's got to get the right one, of course. And then we also have a period before that where candidates are now filing to run for office in all of these new districts. And of course, as you know, there's never any controversy over people filing their candidate paperwork. No one ever challenges that. I think we can anticipate a more difficult season for candidate challenges because of the new districts, but maybe more residency-related issues or otherwise. So I think we can anticipate a robust several-week period where the signatures and the filings are being reviewed for candidates. And that deadline for people to file for office is April 19th, 2022. So that's really kind of the deadline, at least for some of the districts where we need to make sure all the voters are in the right place in the qualified voter file. We will use the qualified voter file, for example, when we're reviewing petitions that were submitted by congressional candidates or state legislative candidates. If there's questions about whether the voters who signed those petitions lived in the proper district, we'll use the qualified voter file for that. So we, of course, need to have people in the right place. We can't be using the 2010 districts to determine if somebody who signed a state rep or congressional candidate's petition actually lived in that district. So that's the deadline we kind of have to hit. But of course, at the same time, as we're going to discuss in a little more detail, you also have a deadline of April 4th when you have to have your new precincts drawn. Because it is a post-decennial census year, you get more time than you normally would. Normally the deadline would be back in January, which would have been impossible, with districts not even probably drawn yet, or maybe just having them drawn. But you still only have until April 4th to redo your precincts. So at the same time as we are putting in these new districts, you're going to have to look at that when you're drawing new precincts, both the congressional, state rep, state senate, but more likely smaller districts, to make sure we're avoiding splits. And then we need to get all those in the qualified voter file as well. So we have to do basically all these things at once. So what do we have to do at QVF? Well, as you all know, we have about 8 million registered voters in Michigan. We don't have 8 million addresses, because a lot of voters live at the same address, but we have several million addresses in the qualified voter file street index. So what we need to do is basically two things. One, we need to make sure that the qualified voter file reflects the new district lines. So the lines that are currently in the qualified voter file, we need to replace those with the new lines. The second thing we need to do is anywhere where there's an address in the qualified voter file where a district has changed or multiple districts have changed, we have to make sure that every single address that is in one of those places where something has changed has moved into the new district. And so we have to do that for 19 different district layers across the entire state. There's a lot of ways we can do this. We don't have to go one by one through 3 million records and update them. Yeah, do you have a question?
I did, just on that microphone.
Thanks, Jonathan. I just had a quick question on that last slide. I've asked for several years, but is there any movement on QVF having a GIS-based street index to help eliminate errors?
Yes, I was about to get to that. Thank you for asking that question. There is an update. I'm not sure everyone's going to love the update, but there is an update. So that is part of the thing we're looking at. So yeah, you can just go for the next slide. So there's a few different ways we can do this. We don't have to move everybody one by one. We obviously have the ability to make what we call global moves, where if all of the UP somehow moves from Congressional District 1 to Congressional District 2, we can obviously make that batch move for all of them at once. And then we can do that on a smaller level as well, within cities and districts and precincts as well. But there are a lot that we have to do that are address by address. So that's the part that's going to take several months, is going through the smaller ones where there's maybe a district line that cuts across a municipality, maybe even cuts across a precinct, and we really have to make sure that we're going at the micro level to get everybody in the right district. So that's what's really going to take the most time here. And then we do have to do the precinct changes in April, working around that May election, for clerks to have elections in May, to basically get all these district and precinct changes in and then review the changes. That's okay. No, I feel the same way. So here's just kind of a final overview of what this process looks like. I will say that in 2010, it took us about 6 months to get the new districts in place. We're not going to have 6 months. We would have had 6 months. We wouldn't even really have had 6 months if they finished November 1st. But we're probably going to have somewhere around 4, maybe 4.5 months between when we get the state level districts to April 19th, where we have to do the candidate signature filing deadline. So that process, that full 4 months plus, is going to be a really busy time for us and for you in terms of us putting the new districts in place, and you, of course, like reviewing those changes and making sure that your districts are all right. So there's going to be a lot of back and forth between BOE staff and clerks to put in the new districts and to verify information is correct. There's a couple things that we're doing to try to make that process a little less painful. So Jackie's question was basically about the modernization of the qualified voter file in terms of addresses. So there's basically two ways that you can capture addresses or a map in a voter database. One is what we have, which is an old-fashioned tabular system where we just have an index or a range of streets. You're all familiar with that process when you have to submit a street index request. We basically just have a list of ranges of addresses that we have to go through manually. The better way to do it, the more modern way to do it, is with a GIS, Geographic Information System, or geospatial. There's a lot of different words for it, but basically it's something that reflects actual geography, like points on a map that we can use to move things much more efficiently. The qualified voter file, when we redesigned it with QVF refresh, now does have the capability to work as a geospatial or GIS-based system. But the process of moving it over takes several years, and it's not something that we're going to be able to do fully in time for redistricting, which is very unfortunate because it would make the process much easier. But we are looking at some options for parts of the state, counties that already have pretty sophisticated GIS systems set up, to see if we can maybe do some chunks of the state, some counties using the GIS system. That would allow us to move addresses much more efficiently. It would still be time consuming, but basically for those parts of the state, we would then be able to move addresses as points on a map instead of having to look up ranges. If we can do it that way, those counties will go faster, and then we also have more resources to devote to the parts of the state that don't have that. So it will really help everybody if we're able to do that. And so that's one of the two big things that we're working on this year, is trying to get at least partially the qualified voter file to work as a GIS-based system to start moving addresses over. The other thing that we're doing is working to replace the system that we used 10 years ago, which was basically a bunch of emails, with a module within qualified voter file that we can use to trade information about changes to districts. So I think Christy is going to give you a very high-level description of that, that when we actually put it into place, we're going to have training modules and an explanation from the QVF experts who are designing the system. But it's basically going to be kind of a portal that you can access through QVF where we can more efficiently trade information about district updates. So those are the two things that we're mainly doing to try to speed the process up. But it's definitely going to be a huge project for all of us in the early part of 2021. Last thing I'm going to touch on, I'm going to hand off to Christy, is just a quick note on county commission apportionment. The county clerks were very concerned about this last week. I don't think you're all going to care quite as much, but it affects you too. The other thing that has to happen with the census data is that within 60 days of the release of the official census data, the county commission districts have to be redrawn. And they call this county commission apportionment, which is very confusing because it's really like, it doesn't have to do with census apportionment data, which is statewide, but it's basically census county commission redistricting. We did build a tool for the counties to use if they want that allows them to use the census blocks to redraw their county commission districts. This should help some counties get those districts done a little quicker and a little easier, which should make it easier for you as well in terms of looking at that for your precincts. The tool is optional, so not every county has to do it. Final thing I want to note on this is that the tool that we built, which was actually released today, does work with either the old census format census data that was released on August 12th or the new data. There is a question that's going around about whether the 60 days that the counties have to redo these districts starts on August 12th when the legacy data came out, or on September 30th when what we think is the official data came out. We think it's September 30th, but the counties can start now, so some of them are starting now, basically just in case August 12th is the deadline, and we have asked for the AG to weigh in on this, so we should have some more clarity on it. But the point is, counties can start doing their districts now, and frankly, they should be done with either deadline. They should be done well in advance of when you have to redo your precincts. So that's just something else that's going on. So with that, I'm going to hand it off to Christy. We should have some time for questions, I hope, but I will pass it off to her. And thanks again, everyone.
Good afternoon,
afternoon. So glad to be here with you all in person and some of the folks that are still virtual. Christy Dugan with the Michigan Bureau of Elections, and we are really looking forward to being able to do some more of these in-person things, so to see all of your faces, whether still just the eyes or the rest of them. So as local clerks, you're going to have some responsibilities that maybe you haven't heard of, or you heard us talk about in training, where you're like, oh, they mentioned the election commission. You've been dealing with them with appointing your election inspectors and so forth, but now they're going to get involved a little bit more with the drawing of the precinct boundary lines. So that's just the first slide that we have up here. In a township, the approval of precinct line alterations, they got to be granted by the local election commission. Same thing with the cities and charter townships and the makeup of that. With the cities, you look to your charter as to who those individuals are. So now might be the time to put those individuals on notice that they may have to take a bit more of an active role, so it doesn't all fully fall on the shoulders of the clerk. And you know your communities, those other elected officials know the communities and the dynamics of your precincts. So as far as local dates and deadlines for that, Jonathan already noted that in the year following the census, you get a little bit longer deadline to reset those lines, because we need to know what those maps are and to make accommodations. So April 4th is the drop dead deadline for redrawing your precinct boundary lines and adopting those with your election commissions. So, and just a reminder that any resolution for those precinct boundary lines do need to be submitted to the Bureau of Elections, and we'll follow up as deadlines come to bear, that what we need at those times as well. And of course, any election commission meeting, we want to remind you that it is a public body subject to the Open Meetings Act. So whenever you do plan that meeting, you got to make sure you post it 18 hours ahead. So when you're kind of educating your fellow election commissioners as to what are precinct boundary lines, you can provide them with this section of law where it's a clearly observable boundary. And whether it's a named road or street, or a highway, or a river or stream, or a county drain. Otherwise, sometimes there's, for some of our college towns, it's a specific dorm or an apartment building or something to that effect. Could be a village or school district boundary lines. And I always like to use my hometown as an example. My township clerk is very fortunate because our village is wholly contained in one precinct. And she's probably looking forward to expanding the boundary or the precinct sizes because we're growing. But that can be healthy with the splits. So another thing to consider when changing precinct boundary lines may lead to the need to adjust your polling places. Because you're also going to be thinking about your polling places and where these precincts will be sent to vote, and whether you have a polling place that has multiple precincts that meet, it's large enough, and you're going to look within those precinct boundary lines as to are you increasing the number of registered voters, and so if I have two precincts voting in one place, am I supersizing one of my precincts more than I did because the boundary lines are shifting and so forth. So that is just something to kind of have on the background thought of precinct boundary lines. This is where I remind you, as the middle school teacher coming out in me, I remind you that precinct boundary lines are different than polling places. The deadlines are different, and the bodies that approve them are different. So with the precincts, your boundary lines are your local election commission, and the deadline is now 120 days out from the primary for this one. But the polling place itself, if you don't want to stress too far ahead, you're thinking, oh my goodness, the school's not going to let me in, or I have to set that too at the same time that we do the precinct boundary lines. The polling places can be established no later than 60 days before an election. So you could have an unofficial plan in your head for where your precincts are going to go actually physically vote a little bit later, and then the polling places are established by your legislative body. So you do have to bring those in front of your city or township board. So other considerations when you're thinking about the election commission and the decisions to make when you get those legislative and county commission maps are split precincts. And split precincts are when you have multiple ballot styles due to different U.S. House or legislative districts. But also thinking about school districts and village districts that also layer on top of those different legislative districts. And of course that impacts the issuance of absent voter ballots and the management of election day ballots. And I was talking to somebody earlier about wanting to keep things as straightforward as possible for certainly clerk and clerk staff who, you have enough to deal with making sure you get that right ballot and the right envelope out to the correct voter. And the same thing for your election workers on election day. I don't know, I think I've heard 6 to 8 splits in a precinct or like the most, just due to the school boards. And that's, while it can be managed, sometimes it's unavoidable, but we want you to be conscious of that. And so when that, in redrawing your precinct boundary line gives you the advantage to think about reducing the number of splits and the number of ballot styles, and hopefully, in the long run, reduces the amount of stress that you have prior to election day and on election day with assigning ballots. That's my optimistic approach to that. So once you're kind of going through this process to, and all your considerations, whether they be resource management and boundary lines, you're gonna have to update, you're gonna have to go to some other tasks that there's some of these things that you can start thinking about now as a clerk, even without the maps and without the things from the county, because there's going to be the need to update the street index. So whenever a precinct or district boundary line changes, those values in the street index must be updated. And so this is the part of the presentation where I wish I was Nicholas Dahm, if you've ever worked with Nicholas in our office, but I am not. And he sent these to us, and so bear with us. But he encourages us to use authoritative data. So those precinct maps, the new federal, state, and county district maps. So in the long run, this is what once we get those maps, you're going to have to use those to be able to input, to make sure your street index is updated. You're going to have to translate the maps, which are just our physical picture maps, into the QBF street segments. And so a street segment in the QBF is, of course, the number series on a street that, the voters within a certain street, within a certain number series, odd or even, you could have, certainly multiple street segments on the same street. So assigning new precinct and district value to an existing street segment, or split an existing street segment and then assign the new. So it's going to be, hopefully you get your detail person in the office or your numbers person that kind of looks at the logic of things and gets to understand. So I would encourage you, because of the information that you're going to have to put into the QBF Street Index after the first of the year or so, get to know it now. Get to know how to utilize your street index even now, and what the pieces and parts are, and understanding it so that it's not all completely Greek come after the first of the year. So precinct changes when you have to submit to our office in the QBF what you need to be inputted into the QBF. You're going to need a map of your current precinct boundaries. So that's something you could do now. You could get organized right now, your maps of your current precinct boundaries, and making sure you have those. And then a map of your new or proposed precinct boundaries, or what you want inputted into the QBF. And then a signed copy of a resolution from your election commission approving those changes. And then, like I said, you gotta get to know what the street index does. We're gonna need a marked up street index listing report, or any digital changes in the QBF if we are able to tweak that module enough for you to utilize to do it more electronically. So that's something that y'all can cross your fingers on and hope that we can push some of the tech folks on that, so we can make that an available tool for you. And a written description of your new precinct boundaries and a list of all precincts, including the name and addresses of the polling places for those precincts. So it's pretty comprehensive. Don't think we'll never show this to you again. Don't worry. I'll make sure to get this presentation to the board so that they can disseminate as they do, and certainly we'll be following up on that too. So when updating the street index, we've already talked about this, that the redistricting tools are being developed and may be available in a module in the QBF. So certainly just keep sending your positive vibes and hope on that. So the tools will allow you to assign the new precinct district values or split the street segments and then assign the new on top of that. So then that would help us, if we get to that point, not have to have that hard copy marked up version. I mean, that's our wildest dream too, because we might be good bureaucrats, but the paper work is don't dream of that. So, and then the district changes, we would ask you to submit the following marked up, or if available in digital, we do that too. So, precinct and geography size, all addresses, just adding new streets, and that is a separate process. So the thing we want to point out here is, and you might want to think about your street index now and making sure you have all of your updated streets and street segments in the QBF or in the street index now. Have you added any subdivisions? Have you added any permanent homes in your communities where maybe you had just seasonal lake homes, but now all of a sudden, you've got folks registering to vote there because they put some insulation in. Make sure you get those addresses into the street index now, because we're not going to let you add them during the redistricting period. This is going to be enough. So it's a good time to make some adjustments on the street index. And a reminder that at this point in time, precincts cannot contain more than 2,999 active voters. Nicholas thinks the GIS may help with that. And other considerations when thinking about your precinct sizes and boundary lines that kind of the training staff put together is thinking about resource allocation. It's more than just moving people around. It's knowing what type of community or how active the voters are of that precinct that you're putting into together, or maybe you've got a higher AB turnout in one precinct or one area or another. What's your resource allocation for that precinct? And then if you have shared polling places and their location and availability, the volume of the voters that we walk in through the door. So those are some of those maybe not so tangible things that you as clerks might be able to input with your local election commission in making their considerations. So other important steps, notify all appropriate agencies of the changes, like state, county, school. The school district might need to know some of those changes. Update your jurisdictional maps to reflect the changes, and your county GIS, your website, any other public documents. So as you know, the clerk's job is never done. There's probably a lot more folks that this is going to touch, and then educate your voters on the changes. Utilize your social media, your website, local postings and publications. Maybe you get your League of Women Voters in the area involved with saying their lines have been redrawn and this is why it's a good thing. So, and then there's going to be something after you get through all that. You have to send out new voter information cards to the voters. So an updated voter identification card does need to be sent to each and every voter if it's affected by a permanent voting district change, or a precinct reassignment. So this is, so everyone that's going to have a change in that congressional number, or even a county commissioner district or a precinct number, will need a new voter ID card. So this will then, of course, turn into a lot of returned mail to your office. So this is a list maintenance opportunity. And you might have noticed recently our office released a module as part of the continuing education of clerks about regular list maintenance and return mail and how to treat that. So if you or your staff still need to take that module, it might inform that. We have a quick guide even that you could print off and have next to the computer and ready for whichever staff is going to be working through all of these. And so, you know, voter information cards are important to get out to your voters, and it'll, you know, and that's part of the education part. Some voters will say, well, yeah, duh, I knew I was registered to vote. Why are they receiving this? And so that's a good thing. So, thank you for listening to us. Like I said, I hope that, you know, I could carry that off as well as Nicholas would about the street index, but if you have more intricate questions about the workings of the street index, Nicholas's contact is there, and of course other resources that are available. Our Chapter 14 of the elections accreditation manual is available. We will put out a redistricting module for as you add staff and need to educate your offices on this, or maybe your election commission, you have them watch this, why are they doing this? So, and then of course, always monitor future news updates. Like I said, this isn't gonna be the last time we talk to you about this. This is really kind of the first time we're coming out to talk to you, and thank the board for having the foresight to do this. And so right now, I guess we'll kind of do questions. It looks like Jonathan's in the hot seat right here.
You've got a microphone too. Yeah, I mean, depending on the question, because you don't want any questions about redistricting?
Hi, I'm Michelle King from the City of Flushing. We have been talking with Nicholas before 2020 happened about a situation that we have in the city, and some other cities and towns might have it as well. Our charter requires that we have districts as well as precincts. So a district acts like a ward, but the voters aren't exclusive to the ward. So when a district chooses who they're going to put on the ballot to represent, then the entire city votes for that person. At the time, he couldn't figure out a way to include that in QBF, and I'm wondering if there's been any updates made to that.
I'm sorry, but I don't know the answer to that. I will have to ask Nicholas. But to clarify, they're districts, did you say that they're citywide though?
4 of them are districts that are, the representative is chosen by the district, so the petitions are signed by the district, but they're all elected citywide.
Okay, I see. So yeah, I'll have to ask Nicholas about that. I'm sorry, I don't know the answer.
Hi, I'm from Highland Park. So this is my first statewide redistricting, so I hope this question doesn't come across as dumb, but my grandmother always said there's no such thing as a dumb question except for the one that you're gonna ask. So since we're all here, I'm gonna ask. So based on what I hear, I don't know if I'm making this up or I'm hearing it wrong, are you saying that it's possible that because of the census, like our city could be split? So like say, we might be the 3rd district. Like part of our city could be the 3rd district and part could be the 2nd, our whole city, although it's only 2.9 miles, that could really be a thing?
It is possible that that would happen. Because, I mean, you know, it could be split in any number of ways, but I mean, you could have a congressional district that goes through it, or a state house district that goes through it, or a state senate district that goes through it, or multiple ones of those. The commission, when they redraw those districts, they are supposed to consider the boundaries of local jurisdictions. So one thing they're supposed to consider is, let's try to not have the state house district go right through the middle of Highland Park. But they're also supposed to consider a bunch of other things. So in balancing all those together, it is inevitable, I think, that at least some places are gonna have a line go through them. Highland Park, you know, it's a small area, but it's also a densely populated area. You know, it seems plausible that might happen, but that's ultimately going to be something for the commission. that also, I think, underscores the importance of these meetings the commission's having. Because when members of the public go to those commission meetings, they can share that kind of feedback. It's relevant to the commission if they hear from a bunch of people in the community that say, we all want to be in one district. Or maybe some of them don't, you know. But whatever it is, the public meetings are a great opportunity to share that with the people who decide ultimately what the districts are.
Hi, Jonathan. You listed April 4th as a deadline for precinct boundary changes. Is there a different deadline for wards? Because we're looking at council members that run by ward, and you have an April 19th filing deadline.
So that's the, right, so your ward deadlines would be defined by the city charter, not by, like when you have to redraw those are defined by the city charter, not by anything at the state level. In terms of deadlines for filing, that may be a conflict with state law, because I think what we typically say is that regardless of what the city deadlines are for filing, the state deadlines govern that. So it could, sorry? Yeah, right, so that could, I mean, that would be something that the city would have to sort of, I mean, we could obviously help you think through it, but it'd be something the city would have to work through with council, like local council, in terms of if you're going to be drawing districts too late for people to file with the state deadlines for those offices. Christy's nodding, so I think I'm right. Yeah, so Jackie said that in 2011 Ann Arbor was done. I'm sure a bunch of other cities were at this time. So this does underscore some of the effects that the census delay has. You know, typically you might have cities that could have gotten started and finished their boundaries even before the state level boundaries were set, but obviously that's not happening this time.
I think everybody's here.
Well, so, I mean, it's going to be a big project. You know, I don't think this should terrify you after everything that you've been through in the last 2 years. Unless this is just the last straw. But I mean, it is going to be our biggest project for the beginning of next year. So like it's, you know, I mean, this is a big deal. It's something that will occupy the majority of our time in the spring, and a lot of your time as well. We are spending a lot of our time now getting ready for it though, and we have been for most of the year. So it's, you know, the work that we're doing to improve the Street Index process, you know, it won't make it easy, but I think it'll make it, we're gonna have a lot more tools at our disposal this time than we had 10 years ago, I would say.
Okay, Debbie Wilson, City of Lovington. I didn't understand that. Thank you, Jason, for that question. My question is the same, then could you repeat that? Because our city charter just says that, doesn't refer to when the boards need to be equal. It just refers that they have to be equal after the census. So there's no deadline. So I'm looking at April 4th deadline for redistricting our wards, and then April 19th final deadline for petition. Is that true? So, probably I didn't quite get that, but I want to hear it again.
Yeah, so I mean, I think each city needs to determine what, you know, how to best reconcile their requirements with what the state filing deadlines are. And so that's why we always say you should check with your local council, but these are what the state deadlines are. But yeah, I mean, the sooner that the wards, you know, the sooner that the wards or other districts can be established, the better. Because ideally you'd want to do that before you do precincts, regardless, I would think. But yes, ultimately, if they're too late, if the lines are drawn too late, it would create a problem for people to meet that filing deadline. So that's definitely an important consideration for the fall and the early part of 2022.
So that when we do create those and we get them adopted, resolutions and everything else, and send them on to you guys, it can be before April 4th, and it could be finished before April 4th.
Yes,
Okay,
yes.
perfect. Okay, my next question is, because I have a school right now that's being torn down, and so there's my first ward. So I have to look for a location, open and bring, you don't have a mail election yet, here for any reason, but you never know with marijuana stuff. Bring it all over the place, but, okay, so I was proposing to use our community rooms in our city hall for that new board location, the voting. But I already used my council chambers for third ward. And I got a little nervous when they said you can't have a maximum of 2,999 voters in one precinct location or one building.
It's just precincts. You can have multiple precincts in one location. You could even have them in the same room if you wanted to, yeah.
But if that population number or that number doesn't matter. So then, if that word isn't in that, located in that word, it doesn't matter, correct? Because I don't have any other location in first ward right now to put because we have no other nonprofit or school or.
Correct, that's a good point to make, is like, does the precinct itself or the ward have to vote in a polling place within that precinct or ward? They do not. So don't get too hung up on that. So you can have up to 6 precincts in a polling place. Now, that should be the biggest gymnasium I ever saw, but, you know your activity of your voter, a lot of them are voting AV, but that's, so just to reiterate, the difference between precincts and polling places, and those deadlines are different, but then also there's not a population cap, I guess, unless it's 6 times 3,000 or, so.
Thank you.
So, Jonathan, I'm Mary Clark from So, if, like, I already have 4 possibilities, 4 different versions of my maps. So, if I submit mine January 2nd, how are you queuing up submissions? Are they by when they come in, or are they, do townships risk getting bumped by cities who may or may not be on schedule? I mean, how are you gonna do this? Not to put you on the spot, but I'm putting you on the spot.
So, I mean, we're gonna do, in general, we're gonna do districts before we do precincts, but that's because we assume we're gonna have the districts earlier than the precincts in most cases. For the precincts, the only thing that we've decided is that we're gonna work around that May election. So we're so if you have an election in May 2022, and I hope you don't, but if you have an election in May 2022, it's going to be probably not feasible for anybody to try to move your precincts in the street index, in April, right before that. But, so that's the only thing that we've sort of decided for sure. Now, having said that, if you have a May election, but you have your precincts done by January, then we might be able to do you in that earlier group. But we're going to be doing the precincts basically on a rolling basis as we get them, I think is the plan. Okay, we have one more thing that Christy's going to cover, and then we'll be around at least for some time. So thanks again, everyone, for making time for us today.
Oh, we do have to do, oh, yeah,
Sorry, I just had one more, just to Rita Bash in Arbor Township. I just wanted to confirm what I think I heard, which is that when the big 3 districts are created by the Redistricting Commission, and that geospatial data is conveyed to the Bureau of Elections, that you will magically make that data appear inside the QBF, and that we are not going through the street index line by line and street by street importing, writing in that data by hand. I hope I heard that correctly.
It won't be magical. The closest thing to magical would be GIS, which we unfortunately don't have statewide. I think it's fair to say that we will take on the majority, if not all, of moving those districts into the street index. There may be some things, though, that we need the local jurisdictions to review to make sure that we're getting it accurate. So I can't say for sure that local clerks won't have any responsibilities or roles in making sure those districts get in, but I do think it's fair to say that we expect to do the vast majority of that work.
One final wrinkle with all of this is if you live in the two state, or conduct elections in the two state Senate districts that just held a special primary and will have a general, or the two cities that had a state house candidate that won a primary and appears to possibly be en route to win their general in November. There's a possibility there will be 4 vacancies created in those state house seats if those 2 for the Senate and the 2 for the local offices achieve their election to those other seats. Then in the event the governor or whatever local charter, if the governor calls special elections in those state house seats that would be vacant, those candidates would file under the old precincts. And it will be an interesting ballot as well. So I'm sure you're very excited. I live in one of those state senate seats too, so as a voter, it'll be interesting to feel your pain. So it's something to be conscious of if you live in those seats. And we'll work with you on it, for sure.
We're gonna start asking around. What's on your
Fun for having us. We really appreciate it.
So thank you again to Jonathan and Christy and team. This was all very insightful. This afternoon, after the break, we are going to be kind of covering a lot of the same topics, but just from a local perspective. So we have a really great panel that is going to be talking to you in just a few minutes. So right now we are going to go on break. Just a reminder, silent auction ends promptly at 3:10. So as you go out to use the restroom or whatnot, stop by the auction table, and then we will start back here at 3:15. Thank you.